Hey everyone, welcome to today's lesson. My name is Wes, and this is Interactive English. In case this is your first time here, the channel, it's all about just helping you practice and improve your English. And if this is your first time here, please let me know. Write your name, tell me where you're from, write that in the comments because I love hearing from everybody, especially new people to the channel. So today's lesson, it's about helping you build your vocabulary, but also doing this while you're reading, because I think reading is so important because you get to see the correct grammar being used, and you also get to learn new words. So we're going to look at some different articles. We're going to pick out some words and create a vocabulary list. So I don't know if some of you remember, a while back I did a lesson about vocabulary related to the coronavirus. Many learners were asking me about that because it's such an important thing that's happening all over the world. There's a lot of news about it, and people were asking about words that are related to this, and they wanted to know what the meanings were. So I'm going to do something a little similar today, but in this lesson, we're going to focus on the economy because of the coronavirus, the economy has become a very important topic because a lot of countries have had to close down businesses, shut down the economy basically, and now we're having a conversation about, well, what do we do from here? How do we start this up again? And there's a lot of news and information out there. So I want to talk about words that are related to the economy. So this is going to be a little more advanced. These are more advanced words because I think this is a very specific topic. But I think it's very useful. It's very important, especially now because, like I said, you'll read a lot of news articles about this. You might be watching the news and you would hear these words. So as we go through this, I am going to do the same thing. I have my vocabulary document right here for the words that we find today. And after the lesson, I'm going to take these words and I will put them down below in the description of the lesson in case you want to review them or just listen for them as we're going through the lesson. I'm also going to show you some of these on this website right here. So let me kind of adjust this for us. And we're going to look at some different articles today that are related to the economy and basically, sorry about that. You can tell this is live. We're going to go through some of these articles, pick out some words, and we're going to try to put them in context and see if you understand what they mean. And that's how we're going to create our vocabulary list. So I do want to give a quick hello to some of you who are joining me today. Thank you guys so much. Great to see you. Orlando, Jura, Helen, Fatima, Erica, Aiden, how are you? Dawn. Thank you guys for joining me. If you do have some questions, I'll try to answer those, but questions about the economy. I want to keep this lesson focused on the economy and some words that are related to that to help build your vocabulary. So if you have some questions, I will try to get to those questions and check them periodically. I have a lot of windows open right now as I'm switching back and forth between these. So let's go ahead and start with an article. All right. So what I've done is I just did a search for the economy, and then I went to the news and I've picked some words out. I picked out some articles that we can start out with and try to find some words that may be new for you that are important and relevant to everything that's happening right now. So let's look at the first article that we have right here, which is talking about COVID-19 economics. I'll read it in case and then I'll go back through and we'll stop and look at some words. So it says, financial gurus bracing for a tsunami of bankruptcies in 2021. So this is an important word that you're going to hear a lot of. People would be talking about bankruptcies. So bankruptcy is a noun. You can also use it as a verb, for example, like to go bankrupt. And let's look. One thing I want to show you, which I will reference also, if you ever want to know the meaning of a word, this is probably one of my go-to online dictionary to put the word in here. I think Cambridge gives the meaning of words they're easy to understand. And when they give you the meaning, they don't use very difficult words. So I think that happens quite often. You look up the meaning of one word and you're reading the definition, and then you find these other words that you don't know. But Cambridge is a little easier. So for example, if you want to do this, and I always encourage students to start making their own vocabulary list so that they can go back and review and really build their vocabulary and start to put these words into their active memory. So if we look up bankruptcy, we can have it. So it's a situation in which a person becomes bankrupt. Maybe that doesn't help you out so much, because if you don't know, we can then just look up bankrupt and get the meaning there. So again, it's an adjective, and it means that you are unable to pay what you owe, and that you are having had control of your financial matters by court of law to a person who sells your property or debt. So what I'm going to do, let's just go over to our vocabulary page right here. And I'm going to add that word down there. So if somebody says bankrupt, all right, it is an adjective, and it means that you are unable to pay what you owe. Now, in this context, we're talking about bankruptcy, which is the noun, and you may hear it used with this verb to declare bankruptcy. Some businesses right now, if they are unable to pay what they owe, they are declaring bankruptcy. And this is basically more of I'd say it's more of a position that they go through this legal process, these companies, so that they can restructure their company in order to try and survive and pay off those debts. So in some cases, it's not always a bad thing, in that instead of a company just saying, look, we're done, they would try to declare bankruptcy in order to restructure the company so that hopefully in the future they can pay off those debts and then they can survive. So I'm just going to put to declare bankruptcy to say the company is unable to pay debts and must be restructured. And I'm going to add restructured, the word like a legal situation, because you would declare bankruptcy. So let's go back to our article right here. Where is it? I told you, got a lot of pages open. So they're talking about, in this situation, many of these companies, they may experience bankruptcy because they've been closed for a long time. And I just want to go through a couple of these. So it says, Australia could face a tsunami of bankruptcies when government support packages and existing capital run dry as a result of COVID-19. A lead financial institution has warned. Malcolm Howell, bankruptcy trustee and partner at insolvency firm Jersick Sutherland, forecasts that the majority of these bankruptcies will come in 12 to 18 months' time, thanks to a delay in the economic impact of coronavirus. The most at risk, says Howell, are small business owners who have been forced to use personal finances to prop up their businesses during mandatory shutdowns. Let's go back through, and I want to take a few more of these words from this. So they're talking about capital. And in this case, you're talking about capital is referring to money that a company would use to run their business. So if I go back over here, we're going to go back and forth. Capital. So capital is just referring to capital. Money, or you could say resources, because capital could be like land too, used to run a business. Now, the other word that I wanted to look at, it was in there, was insolvency. All right. This is the noun. Most of the time, I think you would see this used as an adjective. And you would say a business is insolvent, or maybe they are solvent. So if a company is insolvent, it basically means, well, let's just want to make sure that I give you the correct meaning of these words. Let's check it out and see what Cambridge has to say. Insolvent. I was going to say that the company's unable to pay their obligations and what they owe. So yes, it says a company not having enough money to pay debts or buy goods, and you'd say that the company is insolvent. So we'll go back over to our vocabulary list, and not able to pay debts. And you would say that the company is insolvent. There are a couple of other words that I wanted to point out from this article. One of them was this word right here when they talked about, where is it? There's a forecast. I think many of you know them, but this is a way in which you use words that you may know, and you can use them in a variety of situations. So when you think of forecast, you're talking about what will happen in the future. I think often people will hear this word used when talking about the weather forecast. What will the weather like be in the future? But you will also hear this when talking about the economy, the economic forecast. What will the economy look like in the future? And then the next one is a phrasal verb that they use down here, which is prop up. And to prop something up, like to prop up the business, is just to support. And in this case, you're supporting the business, but keeping it open, keeping it alive and well. They're trying to support the business. They're trying to prop it up. So let's go back over to our list right here, and I'm going to add those words to this. So we talked about prop up, and I almost forgot the other word, forecast, actually. So we're going to add to forecast, which is to kind of predict what will happen in the future. And then prop up is just a phrasal verb. I'll add that here so you know, phrasal verb, which is to support something. All right, to prop something up is to support it. So I hope that, again, these words make sense. I hope that it's easy to follow and understand as we go through this together. I'm just checking that you guys have it. Yes, Abdurrahman says forecast for the weather exactly means to predict, like Orlando and Shorisa just said. Sorry if I mispronounced names. So let's go back over to the next article that I want to look at. I'm just going to go through, because I want to show you several articles. I just want to go through a few paragraphs from each article. So this one right here is saying that coronavirus, grim reality, world economy to shrink by 3.2%, new UN reports projects. So if you don't know if something is grim, it's an adjective. It means that it's negative. It's kind of really talking about just something bad. And it's an adjective that basically it means bad, and you might use it like, well, a grim reality, a bad or dark reality, a grim situation, a bad situation. So we'll add that word in just a moment, but I want to get through and look at some of this. So this first paragraph, I'll read it. You can follow along. In its world economic situation and prospect, or in its world economic situation and prospect, the WESP report update launched on Wednesday, the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, a lot of different departments, the DESA, said that as of mid-2020, the gross domestic product, GDP, in developed countries will plunge to minus 5%, while the output of developing countries will shrink by 0.3%. I'm sorry, I know that all of this news that we're talking about, it's very negative. It's not very cheerful, of course, but The reason why I am doing this is because I think it is very useful. It's important. And this is what many people are talking about nowadays. So I talked about grim. The other word or that I think is important, or it's actually several words, is you might often hear this acronym used a lot. And people are talking about GDP, which you can see refers to gross domestic product. And what that means is it's talking about the amount of goods and the total value of goods and services that a country produces. And in a way, people will use this to talk about maybe as a measure of how successful the economy is and how the country is growing. And they talk about GDP. So when you hear that acronym GDP, it stands for gross domestic product. The other verb that I wanted to look at, which I think is useful, which you can use in a different way, is plunge. So in this case, if you're talking about, think about a graph. If you're giving a business presentation and you're showing this chart, you're showing this graph, and there was a huge drop, you could then say there was a plunge in prices, or in this case, a plunge in development. So you're really referencing a number, and you're talking about a huge drop would be a plunge, to go down. All right, so let's add those words from this article to the vocabulary document right here. So the first one that I mentioned was grim, is an adjective because they talked about a grim reality, and I just say like bad or dark. The next one was that acronym GDP, which stands for gross domestic product. And often I think instead of saying gross domestic product, people are just going to say GDP. You will hear it on, if you're watching anything about the news, about the economy, or you see it in articles, GDP, gross domestic products, is the total value of goods and services. Goods, I'll say goods produced or services administered by a country. All right. So that would be the meaning of GDP. The amount of goods and services, the total value, and people will use it to measure success. All right. Let's look at, I got another article that I want to show you, or a couple more. So as I said, if you're just joining us, we're working on putting words in context and trying to build vocabulary. So the title of this article is about the United Kingdom, The Guardian View on the UK Economy, Deep Depression and a Huge Bill Ahead. This is a word that may get thrown around, people talking about a depression. Or they may say at a minimum, the economy is heading into a recession. A recession is which growth is slowing, and it's actually it's contracting. All right, it's going the other way. A depression would be more of a time period where there is no growth. A lot of people are losing their jobs, and this is something that people are worried about if we are going into some sort of global depression. So we'll come back. I'll come back to this word. I just want to have a look at this first paragraph right here. Let's see. So I'll read the paragraph and we'll pick out a few words from this. So it says, to grasp how low are the expectations for the economy, consider this. On Wednesday, it was announced that the UK's national output had just had its biggest drop since the great crash of 2008, the financial crisis. And the immediate response of many analysts was surprised that it hadn't happened further. And so the statistics make grim reading. Grim, there's that word again, bad. Over the first 3 months of this year, GDP, gross domestic product, shrank 2% on the previous quarter. The economy was already slowing in February, and then came the UK's first coronavirus deaths. In March alone, GDP plunged nearly 6%. I didn't plan this. They just happened to be using these same words over and over, which is good. It's good review. Like I said, these are common. The greatest contraction since records began in 1997. Amazingly, most of the world, most of that would have happened over just the last week or of the month. The first full week of the government's lockdown, the impact was drastic. Travel agent demand collapsed, car plants shut, and exports fell off a cliff. The winners were few and far between. The computer industry got a boost as those having to work from home brought laptops, while the paper industry had an amazing few weeks. All that hoarding of toilet roll proved good for someone. So this is talking about the situation. I want to look at a few words. So we talked about depression. I'm going to add that word. Some of these words, like I said, we've already looked at. So we talked about grim is an adjective, which means bad. That's on the list. GDP, gross domestic product. Again, they're saying it shrank, which is the past tense, to shrink. And we also have that word in there, plunged. I don't want to click on that. It'll take me to another one. Now, what do you think this word means? They're talking about it plunged, a contraction. Now, this, you may hear this being used when talking about English. And because before, I have done lessons on contractions. And in English, when you contract words like I will becomes I'll, or we have, we've. You're taking two words and you're pushing them together and you have a shortened version. So in this case, you're talking about growth. If something is contracting, it's going back in. It's getting smaller, is a contraction. So depression, contraction, these are other words that we can use which to talk about the economy or a situation if something collapses. I think when you think of the meaning of the word collapsed is something that just, it falls down. Like a building could collapse, a bridge could collapse. But in this case, if they're talking about demand is what people want something. Demand, people want it, is collapsing. So people just don't want anything anymore. So these are words that you can use in a variety of situations to describe something like a building fell down, it collapsed. Demand, collapsed, it fell down, there's no demand. Or if I'm very tired, I could say, I went home, I collapsed on my bed, and I was so tired, I fell down. So those, I'll add that other word, and I want to use this expression right here. If you say that something fell off a cliff. So when you think about the economy, I think often, like you see, there are so many numbers in there when they talk about 2%, 6%. And when you say that something fell off a cliff in this context, you're really talking about the numbers that were moving along, and then it just dropped. So instead of saying it dropped, if you want to really, this would be a more way of using more colorful language to say that there was a huge drop. You could say that it fell off a cliff. So let's go to the vocabulary document, and I'm going to add those words. Collapse, fell off cliff. Let me see. Hopefully I can remember them. So we talked about, well, before we do, again, to give you some more examples using Cambridge, if we type in that first word, a depression. All right, it does have different meanings, which some of you may have heard it used in this other context, like if somebody's unhappy and it's a state of unhappiness, you are experiencing depression. In this case, if we go down here, we're talking about the economy, a period in which there is very little business activity and not many jobs. It is a depression. So I'll take this, very little business activity, and we're going to add it to our vocabulary document down here. Let's see, make sure you guys can see this. All right, so if we're talking about a depression, I will just say period with little business activity and few jobs. All right. I said some of those other words when you're talking about describing the economy, and you can use these words if you're giving a business presentation and you're using numbers and you say that something collapsed. All right. You're saying that it, I'd say, just fell down or fell apart. All right. And in this case, they were talking about demand, which let's add that word because that's another important word when you talk about the economy, and people will talk about the demand for certain things. At the end of that article, they referenced toilet paper. So when this all started, there was a huge demand for toilet paper. Many people want something. Demand, I'd say, demand, the people who want things. All right. And maybe it should be talking about people when people want things. The other word that you would hear often as well with this, I'm just going to write it, supply, is talking about the availability of things. And you may hear this used as a binomial pair, and people might talk about supply and demand when discussing the economy. They may say, well, we need to think about the supply and demand. Those two kind of go hand in hand, because what you want, if you're trying to make sure the economy is running efficiently and effectively, if there is a demand, you want the supply to meet the demand, so that you have this balance between the two, the supply and the demand. We also said, I gave that expression, to fall off a cliff, is when you want to express, if you're talking about numbers, I'll just say to fall sharply, or I'll just add plunge. And it's another way of saying that. If you say that the demand plunged, it fell sharply. The demand fell off a cliff. It fell sharply. All right, so let's see. I'm trying to think of, somebody asked Orlando, is it a downturn? So I'm not sure what you're referencing in that one, like a depression, but that's another good word to write if you're talking about an economic downturn. Is, I would say, when the economy changes from positive starts I'd say when the economy starts to contract, all right, or change, reduce, or a reduction in growth. Because if an economy, for example, is growing at, let's take 5%, and then it changes and it starts growing only at 3%, it's still growing in a positive way, but you could still refer to that as an economic downturn. You started contracting, you started going the other way. Great word. All right. So that's another word. Henry asked about fluctuate. If you're talking about that, that's a good word. Verb fluctuate is basically to go up and down. So for example, if you're talking about prices of something and you say the prices fluctuate, the prices go up and then they go down, up and down, and they fluctuate. So again, these are all great words that you can use if you're describing, talking, again, your any type of presentation that you may be, sorry if you can't see this, right down there, any type of presentation that you may be giving that you're using numbers and you're describing some graph, talking about numbers, these are very useful. Let's do one more article. So if we go back over here, where is it? We talked about this one. All right. So this one says, coronavirus Chancellor Rishi Sunak warns of significant recession. So I said before, depression is one word that you may hear. I think that is the extreme example. That is the worst case. At this point, I think people are talking about that there is definitely going to be a recession. So we are going to add this word to the list in just a moment. But I want to look at the article and pick out a few more words right here. So let's see if you guys can see all of this. So I'll read that first part. It says, the Chancellor has said it is very likely the UK is in a significant recession, as figures show the economy contracting at the fastest pace since the financial crisis. Remember, contracting, it's decreasing. The economy shrank by 2% in the first 3 months of 2020 as coronavirus forced the country into lockdown. Rishi Sunak told the BBC that just a few days of impact from the virus in March pushed the economy into decline. Economists expect an even bigger slump in the current quarter. Mr. Sunak said it is very likely that the UK economy will face a significant recession this year, and we're already in the middle of that as we speak. That first quarter drop was driven by a record fall in March output and comes after the economy stagnated in the first quarter of 2019. So let's look at some of these words. You've seen some of these in the other articles we've looked at. Shrank. I haven't written that one, but again, you're talking about the verb to shrink. It's getting smaller. Notice that there are many words in here that have the same meaning. But when you're writing, it's good to use different words. I'm sure other teachers have told you that if you're writing an email, if you're writing an essay, if you're writing something for work, you want to try to use different words instead of saying the same thing over and over again. So one other word that I want to look at in here, slump. If you're talking about the economy, again, there's a bigger slump, which is a kind of a rough period. A difficult period is called a slump. I often think you could also hear this word, I think of sports too, that if you have a team that starts losing several games in a row, they might say, we're in a slump. We're in a bad period right now, and you could call that a slump. So you could use this in a variety of situations. Any time where you're having maybe a bit of bad luck and just things aren't working out, you could say, I'm in a bit of a slump right now. Things are not good. So that is one word I'll add. And then the other one, which again is this one, they're talking about stagnating, if something stagnates. So let's go back over to our Cambridge. So you guys can, again, to reference this, if we're talking about a recession, and you can kind of get the idea how it's different than a depression, a period when the economy of a country is not successful and conditions for businesses are bad. So it's just not successful. Business is bad, and that's happening right now. So you could say that right now we are in a bit of a global recession. And if it keeps going, if things get worse, it could turn into a depression. So this is probably where we're at right now. Not successful, bad conditions. I also used the word, I wanted to look up stagnate just to see what they have. So if something is stagnating, again, if you are describing some situation, perhaps a graph, and you're using numbers and you're pointing to this chart, and you could say that, growth stagnated, that it's staying the same, it's not growing, it's not developing, it's stagnating. So let's go over to, where is it? Our vocabulary list, and we're going to add those words to this document. So instead, I'll add recession right below depression. Recession, period, with bad, with a bad business situation, and poor Well, I'll just add that. I forgot the exact meaning they said, but I can go back and check it out. So we're talking about right now we are in a recession. If things get worse, it could turn into a depression. I told you down here, let's add this word. Oh, sorry. I added recession up there for us. And down here, I'm going to add slump. So slump, again, is an adjective, and it means a period in which things, I'd say, are not going well. All right. So I told you that if there is an economic slump, this period where things are not growing, perhaps the economy is contracting, or if you're talking about sports, I gave you that analogy too, that if a team is a period where they're just losing, they lose one game, they lose the next game, you could call it a slump. And then we said to stagnate is when there is no growth or development. To stagnate. All right. So, and I again, if you saw that I just chose some articles at random. I looked at some of these articles this morning and just kind of picked them out and thought that, oh, these articles have some useful words in them. So I will take these words from our vocabulary list. I will put them down in the description. But I hoped as we went through those articles, you noticed that you saw the words again and again and again. So I hope this helps if you are reading an online article, something to do with the economy, and you might encounter these words, and then you can try to put them in context in case you forgot what they mean. Or hopefully, as you start to see these words more and more, you will just remember their meaning. It is such a wonderful way. Reading is a great way to build your vocabulary, especially with words that you have already learned and you're a little unsure of, and you get to see them again. So I highly recommend you guys keep reading as much as possible. Thank you guys so much for joining today. Again, just to let you know, if you guys like what we do here at Interactive English and you want to sponsor and support our channel, you can get a membership on YouTube or check us out on Patreon. We have some cool rewards. Links are down in the description. And I hope this helps. We'll do more lessons like this in the future. I kind of enjoy being able to actually show you articles of things that are being written right now and trying to pick out some of those common words that you may see so that when you're reading about it, then you'll understand these words because you've already learned them. So thank you guys so much for joining me. Thank you, Camila, Henry, Lali, Abdurrahman, Observin, Orlando, Putri, Sleepwalker, Angela, Aiden. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of your weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I will see you next time. So long.